Greetings, my name is Emily. I am in my 40s and I am recently married to my husband, Nathan. Nathan has a son from a previous relationship, Adam, who is now in his early 20s. Adam is a bright and polite young man. He moved in with us to finish his studies and quickly became an integral part of our blended family. Although the transition to our new environment has not been without its challenges, we are slowly growing closer as a family. Today, I want to tell a story that has great meaning to me, a day that, despite its simplicity, was truly unforgettable. Let me take you back to that moment. It was a sunny Saturday morning. Nathan had left early for a business trip, leaving Adam and I alone for the next couple days. We stayed at the Dolphin Hotel for the weekend in room 1408 to get some rest from our routine. I turned on my favorite playlist and decided to clean up a bit. Sunlight streamed through the large window, creating a warm glow in the room, the perfect day to get things in order. I chose a casual outfit, a light top and mini skirt, something easy to move around in, comfortable for a day of cleaning. I knew Adam was around somewhere, but he usually slept off on weekends, so I figured I had a few hours before I'd see him. I walked around the room, dusting the furniture and wiping down surfaces, completely unaware that I was being watched. Suddenly, I felt someone's presence behind me. Turning around, I found Adam standing by the doorway, leaning against the frame. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, almost a mixture of curiosity and surprise. I smiled warmly at him, chasing away the shyness that had crept up. "Good morning, Adam," I said cheerfully. He blinked, as if coming back to reality, and smiled back at me. "Good morning," he replied, though his eyes lingered on me a little longer than usual, glancing around the room and then stopping on me again. I sensed he wanted to say something, but he remained silent, just watching me go back to my business. I could feel his gaze on me, and for some unknown reason my stomach fluttered. Maybe it was the quiet of the hotel room, or the way the morning light softened everything around us, but in that moment, something changed, as if we shared a private world that belonged only to us. Dusting off the top shelves, I noticed Adam move a little closer, his gaze still fixed on me, as if he was seeing me for the first time. I felt my cheeks warm under his gaze, but kept my tone light, commenting on little things to break the silence between us. We chatted about his classes and weekend plans, though he seemed distracted. His answers were thoughtful but brief. At one point, I reached up to correct a painting that was hanging too high. My skirt pulled up slightly as I reached up. Looking over my shoulder, I noticed his eyes widen and lower, then he quickly looked away. I felt a thrill at his reaction, a feeling I hadn't expected but couldn't deny. At that moment, I miscalculated my balance and stumbled slightly. Before I knew it, Adam's strong arms were around my waist. I mumbled a thank you, but my voice sounded softer than I wanted it to. A blush appeared on his cheeks, but he didn't pull his hands away. Instead, his fingers lingered on my waist for another second, and there was a warmth in his gaze that seemed brand new to me. "It's not a problem," he replied quietly, his voice a little unsure, like he was feeling as unsteady as I was. The air between us felt as if it had become charged, and I couldn't escape the feeling that this wasn't just a normal morning anymore. The rest of the day passed in a tension that neither of us paid attention to, but that we couldn't ignore. Toward evening, Nathan called and said that he would be back later than expected. There were unexpected problems at work that needed his attention. As I hung up the phone, I glanced at Adam and caught his gaze. He seemed to understand my thoughts, because an understanding smile played across his lips. We spent the evening in unspoken agreement, moving around each other with a sense of awareness that hadn't been there before. I could feel Adam's presence even when I wasn't looking directly at him. Every moment seemed stretched out, every second reflecting the tension between us. The smallest gestures, his hand touching mine as we passed, his gaze lingering on me, reinforced the sense that we were on the verge of something we couldn't define. As night fell, we decided to watch a movie together and settled into the dimly lit hotel room. I sat on one end of the couch, Adam on the other. Halfway through the movie, a scene played where a couple was sharing an intimate moment, and I felt Adam's gaze shift to me. My pulse quickened. When I turned to meet his eyes, they were filled with an intensity I wasn't prepared for. There was vulnerability in his expression, like he was waiting for me to make a move, or give him permission to make one. At that moment, a loud bang came from the hallway. The sound shattered the fragile bond that had formed between us. Adam immediately jumped to his feet, and I followed him to the door. We looked out the peephole and saw a shadowy figure moving down the hallway. Panic filled my chest. Adam grabbed a flashlight from the counter, his face tense. He turned to me, his voice low but firm. "Stay here, Emily." I nodded, my heart racing as I watched him walk out into the hallway. My gaze followed him as he cautiously approached the figure. I could barely make out what was going on, but I heard a scuffle, the sound of something falling, and then silence. Anxiety swept over me, and I grabbed my phone, ready to call hotel security. Every second felt like an eternity, and I held my breath, listening for any sign that Adam was okay. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Adam burst into the room with a serious expression on his face. "Call security," he said, his voice hard but controlled. Someone tried to break into one of the rooms, but they managed to escape. I dialed the number quickly, my hands shaking. Adam stayed close by, his eyes fixed on the hallway and his knuckles turning white as he grabbed the flashlight. Security arrived a few minutes later, combing the hallway and surrounding areas. They found signs of forced entry in one of the neighboring rooms, but the intruder was gone. One of the officers asked us a series of questions while the other took notes. I was shaking with adrenaline, but Adam's presence beside me was a solid anchor. When the officers left, the room was quiet again, but the atmosphere had changed. Adam lowered the flashlight and turned to me, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. I stepped closer to him, instinctively wanting to comfort him. "Thank you," I whispered. His eyes met mine, and for a long moment I thought the world had narrowed to the two of us. Without thinking, I reached out and touched my fingers to his hand. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me to him, and I felt his heart beat against mine. The intimacy of that embrace was overwhelming. Everything we'd never talked about was in it. But as much as I wanted to stay in this moment, I realized we were standing on dangerous ground. I pulled away, giving him a small, shaky smile. "We need to rest," I said in a whisper. Adam nodded, his gaze lingering on mine for another moment before he averted his eyes. "Yeah, you're right," he said quietly, and we both realized that we had narrowly avoided crossing a line that could change everything. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't resist revisiting everything that had happened. The closeness, the fear, the warmth of Adam's arms around me. It was a day that had begun so simply, but had turned into something unforgettable, something that had shaken me to the core. The danger from the intruder had passed, but the tension between Adam and I remained, simmering underneath. The next day things were different between us, not aloof, but more wary. Adam and I avoided direct eye contact, and the tension was palpable, as if we were both afraid that one wrong move would destroy the careful balance we had managed to maintain. Nathan returned early in the morning, unaware of the events that had unfolded in his absence. He hugged me warmly, and I forced myself to smile, trying hard to hide the storm of emotions inside me. Over the next few days, Adam and I tried not to get too close to each other, not to touch, not to let our gazes linger, and yet the tension between us was impossible to ignore. Every little movement, every casual touch was filled with unspoken words. One afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, Adam walked into the kitchen, and for a moment the silence became unbearable. He cleared his throat, breaking it. "Emily," he began, his voice hesitant. I looked up, my heart pounding frantically. "Yes?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out strained. He paused, as if trying to find the right words. "I just wanted to thank you for trusting me that night. I know it wasn't easy, and I'm glad you're okay." I smiled, warmth spilling into my chest. "You were very brave, Adam. I don't know what I would have done without you." Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something flicker in his gaze, something raw and real. It startled and excited me at the same time. We stood like that, frozen in place, until Nathan's voice came from the other room. Adam stepped back, his expression wary again, and I looked away, focused on the task at hand. But the tension wasn't gone. It lurked, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to come out. That evening, Nathan suggested that we all go out to dinner. We ended up at a small Italian restaurant near the hotel. The atmosphere was cozy and the aromas of garlic and herbs filled the air. Nathan was in a good mood and was chatting animatedly about his work, while Adam and I occasionally exchanged glances. Every time our eyes met, I felt a jolt, a reminder of everything we had not said. When we returned to the hotel, Nathan went straight to bed, exhausted. Adam and I lingered in the living room, and there was silence between us. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emily, I'm sorry if I've made things complicated." I shook my head and stepped closer. "It's not that, Adam. It's just, it all happened so fast. I think we were both seized by the moment." I reached out and placed my hand on his palm. "But I don't regret it." His eyes met mine, and there was something in them that took my breath away. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Me too." We stood like that, with everything we wanted to say but couldn't, hanging in the air between us. And even though I knew we couldn't cross that line, some part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to see where this connection could take us. But instead, I took a deep breath and stepped back, giving him a small, sad smile. "Good night, Adam." "Good night, Emily," he replied, his voice filled with emotions that mirrored my own. That night, lying in bed, I realized that what had started between Adam and me wasn't over. It was just the beginning of what we would have to face, something that could either bring us closer together or tear us apart. And as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder which path we would eventually choose. I woke up the next morning feeling a mixture of emotions, hope, fear, and anticipation. As I was getting ready for the road, I could not escape the feeling that the situation was changing, that we were on the threshold of something more. Nathan had already left for the morning meeting, and Adam and I were alone again. I hesitated before I left the bedroom, realizing that to face Adam would mean confronting the emotions that were simmering between us. When I walked into the kitchen, Adam was there making coffee. He looked up and smiled at me. "Good morning, Emily," he said, his voice soft. "Good morning," I replied, trying to sound casual. I walked over to the counter and picked up my mug, and there was a heavy silence between us, filled with all the things we couldn't say. I could feel his eyes on me, and when I finally looked up, our gazes met. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that mirrored my own, and for a moment I thought time had stopped. "Emily," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Aya, I don't know how to handle this. I don't want to make your life harder, but I can't ignore my feelings." My heart raced and I set my mug down, stepping closer to him. "Adam, it's not just you. I'm feeling it too, and I don't know what to do about it either." My voice shook, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He reached out, his fingers touching mine. "Maybe we just need to take it one day at a time," he suggested, his voice filled with both hope and uncertainty. I nodded, and a smile played on my lips. Yes, one day at a time. A moment stretched between us, and I felt the weight of everything unspoken, everything we were holding back. But for the moment, it was enough to know that we both felt the same way, that we weren't alone in this. We spent the day together, and though we tried to keep it light, the tension was always present, just beneath the surface. We walked around the hotel grounds, and the crisp morning air filled our lungs as we walked side by side. We talked about his classes, his future plans, and for a while things were almost normal. But every time our hands touched or our eyes met, there was an undeniable electricity between us. Later that evening, we decided to have dinner at the hotel restaurant. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, the lights dimmed to create a cozy ambience. We sat across from each other, and as we talked, I got lost in his eyes. It was as if we were the only two people in the room, and the rest of the world vanished into thin air. "You know," Adam said, his voice soft, "I've never felt like this before. It's confusing, but at the same time it feels right." I swallowed, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know what you mean," I replied, my voice barely audible. "It's like we're drawn to each other, even though we know we shouldn't be." He reached across the table and his fingers touched mine. The touch was light, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that I care about you, Emily. A lot." Tears came to my eyes and I brushed them away, giving him a smile. "I care about you too, Adam, more than I should." We sat like that for a while, our hands barely touching, but the connection between us was undeniable. Even though we both knew we couldn't act on it, it was enough for us to share that moment to realize that we were not alone in our feelings. When we returned to the hotel room, Nathan still wasn't home, and the silence in the room seemed to heighten the tension between us. Adam and I stood in the middle of the living room, not knowing what to say or do. Finally, I took a deep breath and stepped toward him. "Thank you for today," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "For being here, for understanding." He nodded, his eyes stopping on mine. "I'll always be there for you, Emily, no matter what." For a moment, I wanted to shorten the distance between us, to feel his arms around me again. But instead, I gave him a small, sad smile and stepped back. "Good night, Adam." "Good night, Emily," he replied, his voice filled with the same longing as mine. That night, lying in bed, I realized that this was just the beginning. Whatever was between Adam and me was going nowhere, and we were going to have to find a way to deal with it, to realize what it meant to both of us. And when I closed my eyes, I felt both hope and fear for the future at the same time. Let me know in the comments what you think of this story.